Okay. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is the second webinar in our HBCU Making and Innovation webinar series. We're really glad to have the speakers that we have today. We're excited for their presentations. I am Iris Wagstaff. I'm a STEM Program Director at AAAS, and I'm also the National Science Foundation PI of the HBCU Making and Innovation Grant. So before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. So, feel free to enter your questions in the question box, or you can just hold them until the end. And also, we will share the PowerPoints, the presentation slides, as well as the webinar recording by the end of day Monday. So it should be about a 48-hour turnaround time for that. So let's get started. So the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS, is the oldest and largest general scientific organization in the world. We were founded in the mid-1800s, and we have over 200,000 members worldwide. Most people know us from Science Magazine, but we actually have a family of science journals. So definitely check that out when you get a chance. Our mission is simple, but it's pretty huge, and it's basically to advance science, engineering, and innovation throughout the world for the benefit of all people. And we do that through a number of programs and initiatives and efforts that have a heavy focus on diversity, inclusion, and equity. Some of the other programs in our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department include the Emerging Researchers National Conference in STEM, or EARN, where we support about 1,000 undergraduate and graduate student STEM majors to come present their research. We also have the Mason Awards, which supports women in the chemical sciences. We have the L'Oreal for Women in Science Fellowship, which supports female postdocs in all areas of STEM. Our Entry Point program supports students in STEM with disabilities. And our Sea Change initiative supports institutional change at the faculty level. So one of the reasons that we really wanted to do this webinar series at this time is really to address, the issues that have been going on in our country for the last few weeks and the last few months, with all of the impacts due to COVID-19, and also due to the social unrest and highlighting the systematic racism and inequities in STEM education and the workforce. Our CEO has issued a number of statements addressing these matters that include the shutdown STEM effort that we observed a few weeks ago, Black Lives Matter, as well as the social unrest, racism, and inequity. So definitely please check out these statements from our CEO. And for more information about AAAS, you can visit us at our website. Next slide, please. So the AAAS HBCU Making and Innovation Initiative has been in place since 2018. And I'd like to acknowledge Quincy Brown. She originally proposed and led this effort when she was at AAAS. So I definitely want to acknowledge her efforts and her work on this initiative. Over the last 3 years, we have expanded and built on the initial focus and purpose of the program by building strategic collaborations and partnerships to support HBCU students and faculty. The main goals of the HBCU Making an Innovation Initiative are to support HBCU students and faculty in making, innovation, entrepreneurship, and invention efforts. And we do this through a number of efforts. One of them is the HBCU Making an Innovation Showcase, where HBCU student teams plus a faculty advisor develop and pitch their innovations in response to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And these goals include such problems as, how to address hunger, poverty, renewable energy sources. Another effort that we had under this umbrella are our HBCU Innovation Roadshows that we held last year at North Carolina A&T State University and the AU Center. And we're also planning an Inclusive Innovation Summit for later this year in October that we'll share more information with you in the coming weeks. This work is supported by a National Science Foundation grant from the HBCU UP program, and I'd like to acknowledge our program officers and all of their support over the last few years, Claudia Rankins and Michelle Claville. I'd like to acknowledge our project team. In addition to myself, we have Neela White, who's a AAAS project director, and she actually coordinated and led the 2019 roadshows as well as our 2020 HBCU Making It Innovation showcase. And I'd also like to acknowledge Frank Davis, who's our external evaluator. Next slide, please. So now I will hand it over to Neela White, and she will introduce our speakers for today.
Thanks so much, Iris, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second of our HBCU Making an Innovation Initiative webinar series. I am so excited to have this session with you all, what the Making an Innovation community is doing to help solve the COVID-19 pandemic. We have three amazing speakers today, and I really think that you all will enjoy learning more about the work that they do in their respective companies and then having a moderated discussion following their presentations. Our first presenter will be Dorothy Jones Davis. She is the Executive Director of the Nation of Makers, a nonprofit whose mission is to support America's maker organizations through advocacy, resource sharing, and the building of community within the maker movement and beyond. In this role, she is deeply interested in creating connections between a diversity of makers, enabling them to use their collective skills to harness solutions for the world's challenges, grand and small. With a PhD in neuroscience, Dorothy has previously held roles at the National Science Foundation, the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, and the University of California, San Francisco. Dorothy's interest and passion for making began when she was a child. You can see her Medium post on why she makes. And then tinkering with broken electronics with her dad. In her spare time, she now enjoys carrying on the tradition of building and making with her 11-year-old daughter. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dorothy, who will present to you about her work and what she does with the Nation of Makers.
Thank you, Neela, for that introduction. You can go ahead to the next slide. So as Neela said, she's already said our mission statement. Nation of Makers is a national nonprofit whose mission is to support the full range of organizations that impact makers. And we do that through building community, encouraging connections, broadly sharing resources, facilitating funding opportunities, engaging in policy development, and advocating for the maker movement. We support makers. Next slide, please. Really, our role is in three large pillars. Community building, we create an inclusive community of practice. We abide by a set of core principles that are grounded in social justice and diversity. We really enhance this through a membership program that brings together maker groups from across the country. We have a newsletter that we put out and community calls. We bring people together every year for our annual convening NAMCon. We also do partnership development and work with a number of prize challenges and competitions, including the American Made Challenges. We're involved with solar prize challenges. So if you're interested in solar, we have some really cool prize challenges that we're doing with the Department of Energy, as well as a new geothermal prize challenge that's occurring. We also been working with Challenge America to look at the ways that we can harness makers to solve problems that are in, for example, first responders needs. And so we're working with them on that. And we also have a challenge with Fairchild Botanical Garden, which is the first tropical botanical garden to have a makerspace in it called Growing Beyond Earth, where we're working with them and NASA and some local makerspaces to figure out ways to grow plants beyond Earth. We do a lot of resource sharing with lots of information around how to start a makerspace, how to be more inclusive with your makerspace, how do we respond to COVID, which is the story that I'll tell you a little bit about today. And we do a lot of advocacy. We're based in the DC area, and we have a lot of local and federal government engagement, so we can try to explain, really what we're doing. The story that I'm about to tell you is part of that. Having things, events like the Capitol Hill Maker Faire, which just happened, which is a maker fair that happens and engages Congress, having town halls, and advocating for funding opportunities. These are all things that we do to bring together the maker community under one umbrella so that we can do things better together. So next slide. I think most of you know what the maker movement is, that it really is hands-on building, creating, innovating, designing. I usually leave the term maker very broad on purpose. I think traditionally the maker movement has focused on a large technology component, but the reality is that making touches upon a number of different sectors. Next slide, please. Everything from manufacturing and education, science, engineering, technology and math, art, music and design, even the food that we eat. I can give you stories of how that connects to the maker movement, health, social good, which we can see right now, and I'll tell you some more stories about that. Defense and security, economic development, wherever you look in our society, makers are having an impact. And the reality is that makers are doing that in so many different ways. And although technology really does help push forward the maker movement, the reality is that we've been making as humans for so many years, since the beginning of time, since the beginning of humanity. And the truth is that each of us comes with our own culture, our own history of making. And one of the things that we're trying to work on at Nation of Makers, as a project that I will not talk to you too much about today, is really to formalize that, to really make sure that cultures of making that may not have been acknowledged before in the mainstream maker movement start to become more recognized, and that in doing that, we're bringing in different cultures of making that will help to have even further impacts in all of these different sectors. Next slide, please. So really, I want to tell you today, I only have a short amount of time, a story of what the maker movement in action looks like. And you can see in these two pictures, you can get an idea of what we're going to talk about. And that's really what was the collective maker response to COVID. And you can see it was everything from people making masks on the left to folks on the right making face shields. And I want to give you just an overview of sort of the timeline of what people were doing, and then a few case studies of two maker spaces, one located here on the East Coast in Baltimore, and one located on the West Coast in Oakland, California, and how they actually responded to COVID in similar ways, and also some of the really amazing nuanced things they did to make sure that they were responsive to their community and listening to the community that they were in. Next slide, please. So as most of you know, if you've been watching TV over the past few months, there has been a great need for personal protective equipment. We were alerted about this when the COVID crisis started back in the United States in March, and makers across the country and across the world learned that, unfortunately, the supply chain that we had all gotten used to that would provide masks, gowns, gloves, booties, hats, and other coverings for our most vulnerable healthcare providers were not available in the traditional ways, and that our first responders and our essential workers really needed help. And so makers responded. There was a groundswell of people that were just like, I want to help. And that's kind of the can-do-itness of the maker community. And so communities such as the Open Source Medical Supplies Group, Helpful Engineering, and the NIH 3D Print Exchange were all established as a way to collect designs, as a way to iterate around designs, and a way to validate those prototypes to make sure that they were well enough to be used in medical scenarios. And so these became repositories, these became groups of collaboration. And so, you know, the open source medical supplies group started out with, I think, you know, a small group of people, you know, hundreds of makers, and quickly over the span of only a few weeks blossomed into tens of thousands, and now stands at over 70,000 makers from across the world that are working together and iterating and designing and prototyping. And so the response was amazing. Makers really responded to the need, producing a vast amount of PPE over the last 4 months, exceeding what anyone probably expected. And so if you can go to the next slide, you'll see the statistic here, which is pretty staggering. So as of when I checked the dashboard that I'll tell you about in a second, which is like 2 days ago, I believe, we were up to 15,179,821 pieces of PPE made by makers in 55 countries across the globe. Go to the next slide, please. And so this data has been gathered by the Open Source Medical Supplies Group, a collaborator and partner with Nation of Makers, and on their global production dashboard, which is amazing. And I highly recommend you go to opensourcemedicalsupplies.org and check them out. They have an amazing dashboard which tracks how much PPE is being produced per week by makers. Now, this is a self-report. There are some caveats to the data collection that they are very transparent about, the way that they do their survey methodology. I'm not going to dig into that except to say that it's pretty humbling to look at this and realize how much PPE and the types of PPE that are being made. Everything from face shields, surgical level masks, other types of face shields, door openers, surgical gowns, ear savers, cloth masks, you name it, makers are making it. And if you go to their website, you can actually play around with this dashboard and see information for a given country. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to take a few moments and next slide, please, and tell you about two case studies. So the first case study is called Makers Unite. It's an initiative that came out of OpenWorks, which is a makerspace in Baltimore. You may have heard about them. Coppin State University has been engaged in some transformative research around trust relationships in makerspaces and economic development that has just been amazing. And so this makerspace is really a superstar in makerspaces in terms of their best practices, their efforts towards inclusion, their efforts to just take care of the community that they're in and to work within that community to grow and nurture. And so because of this, when COVID hit, as many of us were concerned, they were concerned about their community. And they really wanted to figure out a way to make this sustainable. So you can see their metrics here that they made 28,000 face shields and many other types of materials that they shared with hospitals, with primary health care individuals in different locations, individuals that are on the front lines in different ways. But they also did things like provide masks to protesters. They also made sure that they were providing, funding for their employees to continue and funding for volunteers to continue on. So they had some folks that were volunteering, but they were also able to come up with a sustainability model. And I think one thing that this highlights is really how do we continue to do this work in a way that doesn't damage our communities, that's regenerative. One thing that they did that I thought was really amazing is they adopted sort of a Robin Hood model. There was no robbing of anyone, but really what they did is they said, here's the price of a face shield if you're a wealthy hospital that happens to be in Baltimore. And so those wealthier hospitals that do have funding for PPE but just couldn't find the supply chain could then buy the face shields from OpenWorks. And what that allowed them to do was to be able to have enough money to pay for the supplies and pay for the labor so that they then could donate some of what they were making to community members, to healthcare providers that were in need that could not afford it. So these might be lower healthcare tier, neighborhood clinics. This could be other types of elder care facilities that are in the community. And that really shows, sort of what their thinking was and that it was a community-centric, community-first effort. Next slide, please. The other example that I'm giving you today, and I know I'm going very quickly because we only have a short amount of time, is the Oakland Community PPE effort. And this was in Oakland, California, led by Ace Makerspace, which was previously known as Ace Monster Toys, which is a wonderful community makerspace in Oakland, California. And what they really did is they took that motto, focusing on the most impacted communities in our distribution zone. So they're not a super crazy large makerspace. And what they did is they put themselves on the map, the darker blue icon there, and they said, okay, let's map what the case rates are, which you can get online. And so they looked at their data and they took a very data-centric approach, and they said, okay, of the communities that are most impacted, that are also closest to us, who can we distribute to? And if you look at their distribution and the types of facilities they chose to distribute to, it really shows, again, this community-focused reach. So they're making masks, they're distributing masks, but the people that they're distributing masks to are largely the unhoused, the encampments, the street medics that are there for the protesters, the Berkeley Free Clinic, Punks with Lunch, which is a local community group. They really worked with their community partners and actually said, hey, we want to help you, and really just listened. And actually the leader, Rachel Saad of Ace Monster Toys, Ace Makerspace, she said, I actually said, if you want me to go away, I'll go away, but we want to try to help you. And here's what we have to offer. Can we be of assistance? And really listened. And I think that community first mindset is really important when we're thinking about things like COVID, and when we're thinking about how unfortunately our communities of color, communities that are filled with Black and Brown people, are generally the communities that are overlooked for services. They're also generally the communities, as you can see by evidence here by the map, that are disproportionately affected by COVID and by COVID case rates, by COVID death rates. And so those are the communities that these two spaces chose to focus on. And so I wanted to highlight them for that. The next slide, please. So really our role as Nation of Makers has been to kind of coordinate and work with these amazing community partners. We do a lot of community building across different organizations like the Open Source Medical Supplies Group, really communicating with them about how do we best share out their best practices, how do we share out their designs, how do we share out the information that they're sharing with makers about the right things to do, their best practices for distribution, etc. We worked with Get Us PPE. So next slide, please. And then, one before. Okay, thank you. And so at Get Us PPE, we've been working to run their maker site and also this maker side of Get Us PPE, really, again, providing information, serving that sort of neutral convener and resource giver sort of role. So we want to make sure people have information, that people are plugged in, that people have designs that make sense to them, that they're able to know with confidence will be able to be used and safe for people to use, and that we help them get the PPE to where it needs to go. Next slide, please, excuse me. We also wanted to make sure that we're connecting others with our makers, and so we partnered with an organization called Find the Masks to create a map called Find the Makers. And in the Find the Makers map, any individual can find a makerspace near them that might be producing PPE. And so we're still working to try to, as people are getting fatigued with making PPE, we're trying to keep that map accurate. We're trying to make sure we're onboarding new groups and encouraging people to continue to do this important work. Next slide, please. We're also really working, as I said, with resource sharing, not only, trying to make sure that we're curating resources, but curating and distributing funding. So Get Us PPE, with our assistance, has been working on a series of maker grants. One general maker grant for people that are making PPE, a second one that is focused on gowns in particular and starting up fabrication of gowns. So if you're interested in being a gown fabricator and making some gown PPE, we actually have a grant for that. And a third one that is actually for getting PPE to protesters. So if you're in an area that still is having protests and you still see a need for masks, we've gotten news that unfortunately some of the protesters' masks have been destroyed. So we're trying to make sure that everyone is safe in this COVID pandemic, and that we're able to distribute resources widely. We also have been, providing design repositories through Get Us PPE, as well as working with open source medical supplies to disseminate their information. And again, those mapping efforts. And really another role that we're playing is the advocacy role. So having, conversations like this one, but then also trying to work with other policymakers, not just AAAS, but, other federal agencies and other organizations within the DC policymaker area to try to integrate makers into an official response. One thing we know is that we had this huge capacity. So just being able to say what that capacity is and to make sure that people know that when something like this happens, the makers are here to help solve the problem with you. And so finding funding for those things as well. Can you please go to the next slide? So really, I just want to end with my favorite quote, which is by Thomas Khalil. He was the former Deputy Director for Technology and Innovation at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy during the Obama administration. And one thing he was fond of saying is, working together, we can prove that in America, the future is really what we make of it. And that really speaks to this being an effort that is going to involve all of us. Sadly, COVID is not ending anytime soon that I can see. Although we have some promise for some vaccine candidates, we don't yet have a vaccine and we're not sure how long this is going to last. And so in order for us to get through this, we really need to work together towards innovation, towards creation, and using our maker skills to make a difference in our communities and make sure that our communities, the Black and Brown communities, don't get overlooked. Thank you so much for your time. Next slide, Neela, so you can give everyone my information. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're, engaged in any efforts and you're looking for funding, I can also point you towards some funding sources.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. This was such a great presentation, and it was really great to hear what the Nation of Makers is doing, given that the current pandemic, as you've stated, it's still ongoing and it's, we don't see an end in the very near future. So I appreciate all the resources that you shared through your organization. This is just so that you all know, we have 2 additional speakers, 2 presenters for this webinar. Once they are complete, we will have a discussion with some moderated questions and then opening the questions, the audience questions. So I know that there's many who probably have questions for our presenters. So once we're complete with the presentations, we'll open it up for the Q&A. So our next presenter is Joey Womack. Joey is the co-founder and CEO of Amplify for Good, a startup which builds communities of change makers for underserved areas globally and uses rapid problem solving to help companies create social impact. Since founding Amplify for Good in 2014, he's led a cumulative potential impact of 400+ million people working with the likes of CARE USA, Google, and others. Evident as Hive Global Leader, inaugural White House Demo Day invitee, outstanding Atlanta alumnus, and awesome Atlanta Foundation Board of Trustee member, trying to equalize socioeconomic disparities in communities around the world in his life's purpose. Joey was bitten by the entrepreneurial bug in 2002 when he launched digitalguestlist.com as a graduate student at Florida A&M University. He grew the site to 80,000 subscribers, users, and advertised thousands of events for Fortune 500 companies, agencies, and high-profile promoters during special events weekends like NBA All-Stars, Super Bowl, and Essence Music Festival. Joey received his master's from Florida A&M University in 2003, where he was also initiated into the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. I'd like to present to you Joey Womack.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening for some of you all out there. Again, my name is Joey Womack. I also do quite a few other things, including Goodie Nation, where I founded Goodie Nation, where our objective is to accelerate relationships to influencers for endorsements or key advisor roles, to large companies for pilots or partnerships, and to investors and funders for both diverse entrepreneurs and social impact entrepreneurs. And so we're essentially helping to fill the funding gap for these awesome people that represent the next generation of promising entrepreneurs all over the US. In addition, I lead the startup program in Atlanta for WeWork. And so what I'd like to do today is share with you a few stories of 5 to 6 awesome entrepreneurs that have risen to the challenge amongst the awakening, what I want to call the last few months, but also more importantly, COVID-19. If there's nothing else that you get from today, as it relates to being an entrepreneur, it's that problems equals opportunity. And for entrepreneurs, what we drill into our founders is that nobody cares about your solution until it solves their problem. And so these individuals that I'll talk about shortly have what we call a bias toward action. They can go from idea to something tangible in a very short amount of time. And so that's just something that I believe that can be trained. Many people start when they are young, they continue it through college, and then as they get older, they're becoming expert at it. And so we're at a time where this bias toward action, quite honestly, is needed like never before in our world's history. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about a few companies that have had a direct impact on helping people as it relates to COVID, and then a few others who have had more of an indirect or they've had a cause and effect relationship. We know that people of color, especially here in the US, unfortunately have been hit pretty hard by COVID-19. Many of the reasons why are systemic, quite honestly. And so these three entrepreneurs that I'll talk about in a second, again, have really risen to the challenge. So the first one is Dahl Avant, and she is the founder of Aquagenuity. So we talk about being at risk and having health issues that put us at a higher risk for, quite honestly, for death as it relates to COVID-19. Many people overlook water, driven more because of what happened to Flint a few years ago and losing her father to cancer caused by chemicals in the water. Dahl Avant really sprung into action. And she's realized that, quite honestly, and this is not meant to scare you all, but there are over 3,000 more Flints just in the United States. And so Dahl is developing essentially a 23andMe, an at-home test kit for you to understand the quality of your water. So she'll send a kit to you, you run it underneath the tap, you use an app to get like the first level of understanding about what your water looks like, and then you can send that test strip back into the lab for a deeper analysis. And what they're doing is mapping water quality down to the zip code level. This is something that has never been done before. If you look at the news in the Weather Channel in particular, they'll give you things like a heat index and a water, or sorry, an air quality score, where they're looking to take that and integrate it into and have essentially a water quality score. And in fact, they are working with IBM and the Weather Channel into making that a reality. And so again, this is important because what's going to come out more than likely, I think there's early evidence from them, is that from a water quality standpoint down to the zip code level, many of those areas with the low water quality scores are where people that are of color, particularly Black people, live, which again puts us in a very precarious position as it relates to suffering from COVID-19. And so again, water is all around us. How many people think about on a daily basis? How many of you think about the quality of your water? This problem has been here for ages. Very few people have thought about solving it, and very few people have thought about solving it in this way. Now, the second entrepreneur I want to talk to you about is Sean Chavis from Living Book. Sean focuses on developing a customized cookbook for people with chronic health diseases. And so again, many of those diseases will be caused by water quality. Other are caused by food choices. But once you get diagnosed with having a chronic health condition, you then often, or evidence shows that people oftentimes have trouble actually adhering to the recommended dishes in order for them to live a healthy life moving forward. And so what Sean has done is you can go simply to her website, which is, and so the name of the website or the name of the company is LVNG Book. And so you can go there, you can put in the type of chronic disease you might have, and it will on site come up with a very customized PDF of what your cookbook will look like. You can kind of add in a quote here and there. And then it'll send you in a few weeks your actual physical cookbook, which you can use to prepare meals that'll keep you healthy. And so the combination of understanding what's in your water and understanding the right food to eat will help to lower people, in particular people of color, propensity to get extremely sick from COVID-19. Now, in the case that you actually do get sick, the third founder I want to talk to you about is Angela Fusaro of Physician 360. And so she is one of the top entrepreneurs here in the city of Atlanta. And Physician 360 combines telemedicine, meaning that you can meet with a doctor over video, just like essentially how we're talking right now, which is not necessarily uncommon. I mean, telemedicine is a huge thing as it relates to tech startups these days. But just like dolls, she's combined it with an at-home test kit. So you can test for several different situations, and then have in the convenience of your own home, you can pick them up from any pharmacies, and then have a telemedicine appointment with your doctor. And so they're moving into COVID-19 at-home test kits, and also other forms of test kits that are kind of in the periphery around COVID-19. So again, these entrepreneurs have a bias toward action. They sprung up as it relates to solving issues related to health, highlighted by COVID-19. Now, I have a few other stories of entrepreneurs who aren't directly focusing on health, but the situation around COVID-19 has allowed them to show what they're working on and show the importance of it. So the first one is called Community. It is a tech nonprofit that allows or helps to put students of color both on the K-12 side of things, but also college students into esports career pathways. We know that people of color, Black kids in particular, spend a lot of time playing video games, but very few, if any at all, do things like own esports leagues. They manage them. They are a general manager. They own esports teams, or any type of managerial role. And so they not only do they put people on a pathway to become professional esports players, but also to do those more executive type of roles as well. And so because of COVID-19, a few things have happened. Obviously, kids on the K-12 level are not going to school, and also on the college level as well. And so this is an opportunity for them to spring into action and show their value as it relates to education. The bigger part as it relates to HBCUs is that because now many, if not all, sports are canceled for the fall, the thing is, what are we going to do around having athletics, which are our prime driver of income and revenue to sustain Black colleges? And so they are now working with Twitch, which is owned by Amazon, they're a popular streaming service, and also larger companies like Google and Facebook, in order to create the first ever set of esports leagues for Black colleges as a way to raise money for these schools. And again, so if you're in college, which many of you are, I would look to your school. You should be asking the administrators at your school, what are they doing around esports? If we can't play it physically, you should be doing things online. And this is where the whole innovation part comes into play. And quite honestly, for people of color, we've been innovative for over 400 years in this country. The second startup is Deeper, and Deeper is led by Austin Webster and Daryl Thompson. And so they focus on music. In particular, they are helping musicians claim the rights to their music. And so again, this is not directly related to COVID-19, but we do know that many musicians, many of those people of color, cannot make money these days because they cannot perform live. And so Deeper they call themselves Shazam on steroids, essentially. They do have a way for you to simply, by listening to a song, hit a button and understand not only who sings the song, but also understand who produces the song, who wrote the song, who contributed to the song, all those type of people in the credits that don't get all the attention that they deserve. In many cases, there's a lot of money, and the reality is it's over $100 million are lost every year by musicians who don't claim credit to the songs, or not just, but the people who don't claim credit to the songs they helped to create in the first place. And again, many of those individuals are people of color, and they're struggling because they can't make ends meet because of COVID-19. And the final startup I'll talk about is led by Scooter Teller, a graduate of Morehouse, who created Quarantine Con. And so within 4 days of this country going to full lockdown, they sprung up a virtual conference using existing online platform. And they had 4,000 young people of color on this conference, which was insane. Never really been done before. And now they're working with some of the largest companies in the world, and they have produced over 60 virtual conferences since March. An amazing example of a bias toward action from an HBCU alum that's led to a very good, sustainable business that will only do better because the world is adjusting to this new normal where doing things in person may not necessarily be the case anymore. And so again, if I can leave you with this, it is to get ideas out of your head as soon as possible. We all have been in the shower or in the bed, and we think that we'll just get to that idea in the morning, and those ideas never happen. They absolutely never happen. And so write those ideas down, and again, have a bias toward putting them into action. If they're around direct impact as it relates to COVID-19, as John Lewis was laid to rest today, as he said, get into a little bit of good trouble, necessary trouble. So go out there, change the world, listen to your calling, and have that bias toward action. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Joey, for sharing what you have been able to see with your work and with what some of these entrepreneurs have been doing since COVID-19. And it's amazing. We don't think of things such as esports or the music industry, but how that impact, just based upon us being in quarantine or us not being able to have sports and things of the such, have created companies and created businesses and created opportunities for people. So thank you so much for sharing that. And so we'll be moving on to our final presenter. And we have Nina Archie. She is the project manager and diversity tech policy advisor of The Commercializer, a strategic consulting firm. Ms. Archie is an advocate for diversity and inclusion in the tech ecosystem, encompassing intellectual property, economic development, social justice, small business ownership, and access to resources for innovators and underrepresented groups. Ms. Archie's expertise includes creating initiatives and providing strategies on small business innovation research, small business technology transfer, which also SBIR, STTR programs, as well as focusing on increasing the participation of underrepresented groups in the patent and commercialization process. The Commercializer LLC also recently testified before the House of Representatives Small Business Committee on a legislative hearing titled Patent Diversity for America's Innovators, on the obstacles facing underrepresented groups in the patent, commercialization, and small business ownership process. Ms. Archie is the co-lead for the Washington, D.C. chapter of Black Women Talk Tech, and she is now going to be presenting for us. So welcome, Nina.
Yes, hi everyone. So yes, I'm here today to speak to you all about how our innovators in the making and innovation community are providing solutions to COVID-19. So I'm basically going to be giving you quite a bit of initiatives and solutions, as well as the work that the Commercializer group is doing. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so one of the things that everyone has basically noticed and picked up on is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic is not, of course, going anywhere anytime soon. And one of the things that we have basically had to adjust to is the new normal. And for most people, we question, what does that really look like? And so for a lot of organizations, particularly in the innovation community, one of the things that we have had to do is pivot. And so I wanted to basically really stress that right now is a time where people in the innovation community, such as nonprofits, such as research and development for technologies to be patented and commercialized, as well as entrepreneurs are thinking about how do we pivot in response to COVID-19? How do we solve some of the issues that are going on, and at the same time, the benefit is that, you know, we are able to pretty much move innovation forward. So another thing that I wanted to also bring up is programs and initiatives. Like some of the former speakers have stated, a lot of HBCUs as well as other organizations have been hit really, really hard, particularly within modernized communities. And so a lot of initiatives and programs that are centered around virtual technology development right now is really necessary, particularly for small business innovators. Federal labs have had to change or pivot, I should say, as well, private companies. And there's now also been a larger amount of opportunity for people to collaborate on solutions to actually bring together different cures for technology that is helping with the COVID-19, as well as navigating through intellectual property licensing a little bit quicker in order to make sure that, you know, certain agreements are in tech in order to move technology forward. Building entrepreneurial skills has been a major thing in order to, you know, pivot in response to COVID-19, due to the fact that, again, you know, now that we have this pandemic, there is a necessary need, I would say, and as well as an importance for, you know, anyone that does have ideas to bring them into light at this time, because of the fact that, you know, we have a pandemic on our hands. And so I just wanted to state that, you know, developing products to developing ideas that are immediate needs in healthcare right now, as well as a major response to COVID-19. Next slide, please. So I wanted to really stress as well why intellectual property and commercialization of technology is important, particularly in COVID-19. And one of the things that I wanted to really stress and let everyone know is that IP and commercialization will be the foundation of every innovation, vaccines, as well as treatment. So, you know, being able to have strong protections for intellectual property during this time is actually imperative. Also, being able to protect your intellectual property and support public and private partnerships that are trying to collaborate in order to bring innovation to light, or I should say to marketplace, is also really, really important. As well as just basically having the support for and advocacy for IP protection as well as commercialization. Next slide. So a couple of things that the commercializer is actually doing right now in order to help with response to COVID-19 is actually working with HBCU labs as well as communities to move their research from bench to bedside. Also focusing on initiatives to develop those next generation of small business innovators, you know, that can basically reduce burdens in the healthcare system, as well as solve any other, you know, problems that, you know, that may be brought about in a future pandemic, for example. Another initiative that the commercializer is really, really working on is, you know, talking to small business innovators about their projects and, I should say, their technologies that have come about during this time of COVID-19 that they want to basically say, I want to help and contribute, and what are my innovative solutions that I want to actually bring to marketplace. So, you know, coming up with initiatives basically to, you know, help small business innovators, as well as, you know, move forward any type of research and development from HBCU labs is one of the critical initiatives and programming strategies that we're currently working on. Next slide, please. Solutions. So a couple of different things that I wanted to bring about in regards to solutions is I've stated before about, you know, developing virtual tools during this time, since, you know, we all are, you know, pretty much in the middle of a quarantine situation where you're working remotely. So with that being said, we're not sure, when some people may even report back to work, as well as a lot of business models have had to pretty much pivot during this time. So, developing tech transfer sustainability virtually, particularly with HBCUs, as well as speaking with small business innovators about, basically the sustainability of their business virtually is basically the solutions that we have provided to, like I said, academia, as well as small business innovators, as well as working towards creating an initiative to focus on women, particularly that are, of course, underrepresented within the commercialization and patent process. So, basically coming up with how can we pretty much help with trying to increase that participation in order to get minorities as well as women access to government resources and government funding. Next slide, please. And another initiative that I really wanted to bring up that is very important during this time as well is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration has basically created an initiative called the Minority Broadband Initiative Program. And basically what they are doing is working to collaborate with HBCUs to ensure that all Americans can participate in digital economy. Before COVID-19, there has been an ongoing issue in regards to implementing policies, as well as advocating on behalf of making sure that everyone has internet connectivity, as well as having the broadband infrastructure for their organization. And HBCUs have had, I should say, issues with basically trying to get certain grants in order to get that type of connectivity. So right now, we also are looking at, analysis, policy analysis, as well as initiatives and programs that can kind of push forward that issue as well, because that is also pretty much a diversity and inclusion issue, not just within HBCUs, but pretty much in areas such as rural broadband, rural areas as well, where, basically they also lack internet and connectivity as well. And so how this basically impacts small business innovators is, if you are a small business innovator, as well as an HBCU, and you're in an area that does not have connectivity, these type of programs and initiatives are very important, and the commercializer would like to work towards that initiative as well. Next slide, please. Okay, and so one of the other things that we have been discussing with, again, organizations and companies, I should say small business innovators, is programming. So, for example, COVID-19 prioritized examination pilot program is through the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and that is a program where they are pretty much trying to expedite any type of technology that basically focuses on trying to help and solve and remedy any issues that are related to COVID-19. So with that being said, a lot of people may not necessarily know about that program. And so we basically try to, make sure that we educate people about that program, as well as the Small Business Innovation Research Program and Small Business Technology Transfer Programs through the Small Business Administration. They have set out, quite a bit of guidelines that some people may not necessarily be aware of. So we also want to make sure that people know about those guidelines as well. And then the last program that, basically has been very, very instrumental during this time as well is the Office of Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority has been working to identify and fund medical countermeasures to address SARS and COVID-2 pandemic activities. And basically right now they have about 13 accelerators. I've noticed on their site of the 13 accelerators that none of them were HBCUs. So I really wanted to, basically point out that this is a program that you can actually apply for. And I also think that this will be, of course, very important to marginalized communities as well. Next slide, please. And so I'll leave with the statement of the innovation community has pivoted to help attack the COVID-19 pandemic. And the pivot has given the innovation community an opportunity to collaborate and create solutions to generate commercially viable products from lab to marketplace, essentially propelling innovation. And I just wanted to leave with that statement, with everyone keeping that in mind, because right now, as we are pivoting, we should also be thinking of the fact that, you know, we are at a time where we're able to actually create a lot of solutions to actually, of course, generate new products and bring more ideas from conception to reality. And that is it.
Thanks so much, Nina. Definitely enjoyed hearing about how commercialization has been helping with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to ask all of the speakers if they can join their webcams, and we're going to just have a moderated discussion and answer some of the questions that the audience may have. And so I think we're just, there we go. So once again, thank you all for sharing your presentations. It was really great to know the work that you all do, and also just learning about how your companies and organizations are supporting and helping to find solutions for COVID-19. I want to open this up with a question, and I'm going to ask Joey with this. Joey, so our primary audience has been the HBCU Making an Innovation Showcase group and the Innovation Forward Invention and Startup Roadshow group that you were able to speak to in Atlanta back in late September. What makes you think that HBCUs specifically are uniquely positioned to support the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that my default is we've been innovating for 400 years. This ain't nothing new. This ain't nothing new for us. But you know, I think in particular, fortunately and unfortunately, we are close to the problem. And so anytime you know the problem and you're intimate with the details why that problem exists, and you ultimately know the value that you can derive from a solution, it makes you just more susceptible to creating a solution for it. And so many HBCUs, and there is somebody, there's another person with the UNCF who talks about this all the time, that HBCUs are centers of excellence in many cases. And so in large cities like Atlanta or smaller areas across the country. And so when you have this density of very innovative people who are used to making things happen, have a bias for action, and you combine that with a culture of giving back, you're in an amazing position to create change.
Thanks so much. And Dorothy, did you have any comments on that? How HBCUs you feel can be uniquely positioned to provide these solutions to the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think I just want to lend support to what Joey said. I think it's like, you know, this is not new for us. And I think, you know, as he said, like we're really close to the issue at hand. I think, you know, a lot of positive change that's not just a drive-by change, but sustainable change and sustainable innovation comes from the communities within where the problem is, right? So I think, you know, we see all these examples where people come in and they try to be the after-school special for a community, you know, that have a problem. And I think that that's not really sustainable change most of the time. It's usually like a very quick change when the money's gone or whatever the opportunity is, it goes away. I think, you know, HBCUs have been part of our community. They are from our community. They are a community, you know, and they have the talent, the innovation, the leadership to be able to solve the problems within our community and to be well positioned to have those trust relationships, because these are our parents that are getting sick. These are our sisters, our brothers. And so it's going to be on us. And I think the other thing is, the reality is there is no, and this might be a little controversial, but there is no, you know, there's no package coming from the sky. There is no great white hope coming to like save us all, right? So, I mean, I think our innovation comes from our communities. And I think really, you know, Joey just gave a bunch of really amazing examples, as did Nina, you know, ways that we can really get engaged. And the reality is there is funding, as Nina just pointed out, that's out there to do this work. And so I think that, you know, it's only up to us to say, like, yes, I can do this, to have confidence in what you're doing, to sort of go out there and I forgot the term. I had written it down. What Joey said. What was your term there that you said? Bias towards action, right?
Yeah.
So bias towards action. I'm like, I'm going to use that. I will cite you.
I'll take it somebody else, by the way, but that's fine.
But I think that's what we need to do. We just need to act, and the time is now, really, because nobody's going to come and help us out. It's very clear that they're just leaving our communities behind. So.
Thanks so much. Nina, I don't know if you wanted to chime in.
I did. To the last question that you stated, or?
It was what makes HBCUs uniquely positioned to solve the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh yes, perfect. What makes HBCUs unique, I would say, is the untapped talent that I would say, America may not necessarily know about. One of the things that the Commercializer Group has been working on is looking at, how many tech transfer offices do HBCUs have, and how many HBCUs are actually, collaborating with small business development centers where they are, getting that access to resources, as well as what is the technology that, people may not necessarily know about, and how HBCUs may be able to collaborate with, again, public and private, sectors. And so with that being said, I think that, HBCUs are in a unique position because there is a lot of untapped talent that, America may not necessarily know about. And there are several different innovations as well as technology that are coming from HBCUs that, definitely have already, I should say, been helping with, which progressing innovation and moving innovation along. And I'm sure there's much more that, can be done with additional, of course, access, resources, and funding. So.
Great, thanks so much. I want to just bring in audience questions since we're starting to get those. This question states, how do we introduce these opportunities that you all have shared to younger folks and or in other locations outside of the East Coast where we're located, the DC area or in Atlanta? Being in Texas, I'd love to encourage makers to come together to work with these initiatives. So Dorothy, I guess I'll start with you with that one.
Yeah, so I mean, we're trying to do more work. I think the challenge that we always have with the community makerspaces is sometimes they're not sure how to engage with educators or with after-school programs that, K-12 might be engaged in. Depending on the makerspace, sometimes the tools and equipment, they might be afraid for liability reasons to engage with youth. And so we're trying to do more in partnership with organizations like Maker Education Initiative that are really have a very strong sort of outreach and professional development arm to help educators see these spaces as an extension of the work that they do. And there's actually a lot of work that's been done, also, especially right now during COVID time, to make sure that kids not only have access to videos of how to make things with things that are around their house, but that there are also a number of spaces that are actually providing just-in-time kits. So, for example, I know that in New Orleans or in the New Orleans, Shreveport area, that there's some engagement of trying to spread out, some educational activities to students. A lot of public libraries have also been taking this on as part of their mission as well. And I agree, we do need to do more connection. But what I have found is that if you're an educator listening to this or someone who's engaged with the students and you want to plug them in, if you actually cold call most of the makerspaces, they're really friendly and they're wanting to help. They just, are sometimes not sure how to engage. So I think if you reach out to them with a problem, often they're happy to kind of engage. And, at this time, especially, everyone's trying to help each other out.
That's great. Does any other panelists want to respond to that?
I think I'm having a little bit of trouble. I heard Texas and could you repeat that part?
Absolutely. 1 second. The question was, 1 second. That how do we introduce opportunities to younger folks and or people outside of the locations that we've identified, which were Atlanta and the East Coast and DC?
Sure. I think if there's so even on the younger folks, I'll give a quick shout out to 2 companies here in Atlanta who send kits to people. So one is Mantis EDU, MANTIS EDU. The other one is My eSteam Kits. But on the entrepreneur support side, if there is a silver lining to COVID, is that geography is no longer a factor. Now we're able to come together virtually in a probably a decently inexpensive way, where in the past this would have been very difficult to pull off, right? And then getting people in one singular room. We always had the opportunity to do things virtually. We could have done this. Matter of fact, I mean, some of us were doing this like 9 months ago or 6 months ago, but now it's the standard, right? Because it has to be, and I think it will continue to be moving forward. And in particular, for many entrepreneurs of color, one of the primary reasons for not advancing or reaching their potential is access to social networks, limited many times because of geography. And so now geography is no longer a thing. Tactically, that means that now we come together via video. In many cases, we're starting our relationship virtually. And not to get into the weeds of it, but when you actually meet someone for the first time physically, there's an initial awkwardness that happens in many cases, and the relationship does not extend, right? And so video removes that. In many cases, when you're talking to people from different cultural backgrounds, it was an even larger barrier. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that there are many online entrepreneur support programs now that are popping up where everyone's had to move online so much that curriculum now is a commodity. And so you can then go and just join any program for the most part, or at least apply to it, and get access to many resources you didn't have before.
Thanks so much. Nina, I have a question for you.
Okay.
And the question is, what are the challenges that students in HBCUs are facing related to the lack of internet connectivity and broadband infrastructure in response to the COVID-19 pandemic? What are some of the solutions that you would suggest to remedy this issue?
So one of the challenges that I see that are happening with the connectivity issue, particularly for HBCUs, is again the business model. And so the business model, I should say, for HBCUs. So the HBCUs are now happening to change their business model. Of course, other organizations as well, but because this pandemic has really hit, again, marginalized communities, particularly in internet connectivity is one of those issues that you do find that is a major issue with HBCUs. Their business model has now has to change. So one of the challenges that HBCUs will have is actually going through their business model for their organization and seeing basically how can they pretty much pivot, to provide access as well as increase engagement and participation virtually. As well as finding out about different tools that can help with engagement as well. In regards to, I guess I gave you the remedy. Did I give you the remedy first and not the challenge, or did I answer both at the same time? But what I wanted to say really is that the challenge is really and truly now trying to change the business model, and the remedy is finding ways to actually increase engagement, as well as finding out what those virtual tools should be for those organizations. So they're going to have to incorporate a lot of virtual tools into their business model plan at this point.
Right. Thanks so
and
much.
Also expand their audience. So I should state that too, like expand their actual audience as to again, who are they trying to reach, and what message are they going to be setting, because of the fact that, again, like Joy as well as Dr. Davis has stated, everything now is global. So basically that message that they're trying to send should go into the business model as well.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Dorothy, I do have a question. Oh, Joey, did you want to add on to that, please?
I'm sorry, I had never even conceived of that or thought about that question before, but I do think I'll just try to be brief. I think there's an opportunity, because I think the question will also mention a part around where broadband connectivity may be an issue. That last mile may be difficult, but in many cases there may be enough. Like, what would it look like if an HBCU was mobile only? Like mobile only was the only way. And so we know in many cases that young people of color in particular over-index on social media. So they're using Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and so on and so forth. So what if there's an opportunity to deliver content in the very same mediums they're using or in their phone? And that would allow us to scale from doing a few thousand students in many cases to maybe doing 10 to 20,000 students, and then specializing in a certain kind of form, or a certain kind of industry or vertical or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's also, I want to say just really quickly, I'm sorry, Neela, I feel like we're taking you off, but when you think about something. So there is a project in Baltimore, Digital Harbor Makerspace has been trying to get broadband, unused broadband to students, K-12 students, which is a student makerspace. It's a kid K-12 makerspace. And they've really been using the mesh network sort of idea of, just figuring out where there's unused broadband. So the fact that we're all in our house, right, means that there's a bunch of broadband that's not being used. And can we repurpose that and use a mesh network to pop it out? And so it's been successful with sort of small prototypes. But as you guys were talking, I was thinking there's actually an opportunity. HBCUs tend to be housed in communities of color, right? And historically have been in our community so that we have access to those institutions. But those are the same communities that may be having a lack of broadband connectivity for the K-12 system. And so there might be an opportunity for HBCUs to play a dual role. So as they're, troubleshooting, as Joey said, as they're changing their business model, as Nina said, to figure out what online looks like for our students, at the HBCUs, they also could be serving a dual purpose by repurposing the broadband that's actually at the institution, the brick and mortar, to the community. And is there a way to take those mesh networks and do that strategically so that our youth that live in those neighborhoods are able to also benefit from, this weirdness that we're in right now? And so that's just something that popped into my head that might be an opportunity. Somebody out there who's an innovator might say, "Oh, that's my opportunity. I'm gonna go ahead and make that happen."
For sure. And so with that question, it makes me think about another question. Speaking of this new normal of mobile learning and of not being able to be inside a brick and mortar campus at this moment, at least, in our area. So I think of that, and I think of the HBCU maker students, and I spoke to the faculty advisor from Tuskegee University, Dr. Richard Whittington, and he spoke to me that his students weren't able to continue the prototypes that they were working on, that they started for the showcase. And it made me think, what are the opportunities for students who are doing research in labs or who work in teams to create prototypes, and they're, creating innovations? How are they able to continue this when we don't have access to being inside together or having a campus or a place, a lab to do that work and to try and work on their prototypes and to do those sort of things? What are your thoughts on that? How can we continue that work in this new normal of a virtual learning atmosphere?
I mean, I think one thing is that you can, it's sort of the idea of pivoting towards opportunity. So I think that on the face of it, right? I mean, we're in a pandemic. There's no like sugarcoating. There's a pandemic. Right. That there's a lot of problems because of the pandemic, but I think there's some opportunities that it uncovers as well. And Joey, I think your talk really spoke to that a lot. Yeah. There's an opportunity embedded in there. And I think one thing that's really amazing is that just like entrepreneurship boot camps are now online, a lot of the makers have migrated online. There's a lot more content. So in terms of how to do things, and then if there's an accessibility you didn't have before, because all of those people that, were hard to get to when you're at a conference and you're like, I'm a student, I'm so scared to go up to that person and talk to them. Well, now they're much more accessible than they were before, and much more, I have found, they're much more willing to talk with you. Similar to what I said about the makerspaces. So I think, while makerspaces are unfortunately not in every single community, there are usually innovation or maker or fab labs in most communities or not too far away. And so, using the findthemakers.com app, if you're interested in doing stuff that has to do with PPE, you can find makers there. If you go to Nation of Makers website, we have a map called the global map of innovation spaces, and you can find maker spaces that are close to you or innovation centers that are close to you, and you can reach out to them. And the reality is, you know, a lot of the spaces, you're absolutely right, especially the ones that are at educational institutions, are closed. But there are some that are open to limited numbers of people. And one of the things that's really, you know, positive is I've talked this past few weeks to a lot of makerspaces that are slowly reopening. And the people, you know, we asked sort of what's their plan, how are they doing this? The people they most want to reopen to are people that have a business where they can create a new business or create opportunity. And it's because it's a win-win, right? We have this situation where our economy is really bad, you know, job rates are just, you know, we have this huge unemployment rate, right? Like right now, because people have lost their jobs, people have really struggled, and our economy is going to, you know, have a really big challenge. And so what the spaces really are trying to do as they're trying to figure out their own sustainability is they said, let's reach out to our community first, to those who need us, to those who are trying to make a difference. So I think if you come and you're like, hey, I have this prototype, and I've seen some of your prototypes, all of you, like they're all really amazing, and they're all trying to change and solve a problem that's really important, either not just to our communities, but to communities at large, right? And so I think if you go to someone and you say, hey, I have this great idea and I just need some help with this prototype, can I get a few hours in your makerspace? You'd probably be surprised how many people would be like, absolutely, here's the restrictions, here's what you have to do to be able to get access. Don't forget your mask, but we can still give you access. And so if anyone needs to be plugged in, again, don't be afraid to reach out to me. I tell people to be persistent because I get a lot of emails, but I will definitely be happy to point you in the right direction of someone to help you to get engaged, because I think, you know, we're all a community. I think one thing COVID has taught us is that we're all in this together. And I think that our HBCU community is really especially in it together. And so we're here as a support network.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to respond to that question?
I'm good.
Okay, cool. And so we're about 10 minutes out before we will be concluding this. So I wanted to ask one last question of the group. And that is that outside of COVID-19, there are many other societal and global challenges that either your organization, the work that you do, or people that you are working with are trying to provide solutions to. If any of you want to care to share, what do you feel are probably outside of COVID-19, probably the leading grand challenge problems that we need to solve, or that your organization is already solving? I'd like to hear and have the audience hear about that.
I'll go.
Okay.
So for me, we're filling that funding gap for diverse entrepreneurs, and so it's really interesting. So when COVID hit, you know, Black entrepreneurs in particular were hit pretty hard. Just in general, it was interesting that for many tech startup founders of color, they weren't used to getting money in the first place. They were used to bootstrapping, so a lot of things just really didn't change for them, for the most part. Now, some of them were starting their fundraising process, and so because everything was a little bit crazy, they didn't know what to happen. And then, you know, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd happened, and so then just a trove of interest was coming into how do we help out Black people in general, in particular in the tech startup ecosystem. How do we help Black founders in the organizations that support them? And so I believe I put this thing out in LinkedIn. I believe there was someone who was tracking like how much money had been committed to Black founders just in the month of June. They had at that point when I reached out to them, it was early July, it was like $1.6 billion. And so for us, we're focused on the funding gap, the reason why the funding gap exists for our founders. And to be perfectly clear, this means that these Black founders in particular receive funding about 2 levels lower, 2 venture investment lower than where their progress indicates. So for example, some of their counterparts have progress and they raise $1 million. Many of these same Black founders with the same progress will oftentimes only be able to raise $50,000. And it's even worse. It's even worse for Black-led nonprofits, even when they're solving to improve the outcomes of Black lives. And so what we're doing now, I have some huge announcements to kind of come up, but even today, I've been working tirelessly behind the scenes along with some amazing other people, just funded 200 Black founders here in the US, gave them $2 million total. There's another $5 million coming from another organization soon. And so we're using all of our network and our power behind the scenes to funnel money to Black founders.
It's incredible. Incredible. Thank you.
I wanted to also bring up piggybacking off of Joey's comments is the issue with IP ownership and the racial wealth gap. And so through the work that we've seen that basically people really don't find out, about particularly small business, minority small business innovators may not necessarily, find out or become extremely knowledgeable about intellectual property as well as commercialization until, they have an idea, or they may be, after they may be basically in graduate school, or now they're working for a company and they have to assign their rights to someone else. Or it could just be a situation where, by the time they're finding out about, what IP is and, wanting to become an entrepreneur, they may be, I know for me, I was 26. So that type of education was not, given to me early on. And so there's been a lot of discussions about the racial wealth gap. And what I have seen is that there is actually a direct correlation between the racial wealth gap and IP ownership, and how IP ownership for minorities actually can help with actually bridging or being one of the solutions to solve that racial wealth gap. So I just wanted to, basically point out to people that IP ownership, basically should be a knowledge or education that should be learned early on. And I think that also will help with the racial wealth gap issue that we are currently discussing. And I think more people should know more about ownership other than just real estate. As well as, again, knowing more about entrepreneurship at an early age versus, learning as they, are developing something or coming up with an idea, and seeing the value in intellectual property at an early age, as well as seeing how that, again, could be one of the issues that can solve the racial wealth gap. So I just wanted to pinpoint that.
Thanks so much. And then Dorothy, did you want to share?
Yeah. And I want to say I completely 100% agree with that. Like, my daughter is very much she has a very entrepreneurship mindset. We try to nurture it as much as we can because we know that she's 11. And so if we can harness that now and get her to understand that, it goes far. One thing I wanted to just quickly say, that's another area that we've been focused on, is that this is not the last disaster. And the reality is, you might be flipping through your phone and realize hurricane season's upon us, and that there's hurricanes coming and floods and all kinds of things. So we'll get another fire season. And I think one thing I want to challenge our entrepreneurs on this call to think about is, what can you do when multiple things hit, right? So I think there's a lot of people looking at things in isolation, but we know that there's a tremendous impact. And part of the reason why our communities are uniquely impacted, Joey spoke to this a little bit, is that we already disproportionately have a lot of the comorbidities that make this even worse for us, right? So because of systemic racism, because of what's been happening for the last 400 years to our people, we end up seeing that there's disproportionate health effects. And so that doesn't, go away. And to the point about Flint, and to the point about, sort of all these other impacts that we, that are being had that are negative on our community, we need to think about what happens if, New Orleans gets, another crazy hurricane and there's a flood again, and the people that are there, and what happens when the water isn't good and the food's not good, and, everything, and everyone's got COVID. And so, I try, it's a dark place to think about, right? None of us really want to think about it, but it's imperative we do. Because if we don't, we're going to care the most about our communities. And I just implore us to start thinking in advance so that we can prepare. And so again, I feel bad ending on a negative note like that, but it's just that we're, our best solution. And I just, think that we have so much to offer. I know Nina said that, like, it's absolutely true. We have so much to offer. So, I just really encourage everyone on this call to really jump to action, really, think about ways that you can prophylactically, deal with some of these issues that unfortunately will be hitting us in the future.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And so we are 3 minutes away, so I'm going to go ahead and let Iris close us out. Dorothy, Joey, and Nina, thank you so much. I was definitely
Thank you.
impacted by each of your presentations and what you have shared with us. And we will be sharing this webinar. It's been recorded, so we'll be sharing this broadly, as well as sharing the resources. Joey has shared some of the companies he's worked with. Dorothy, you and Nina have both shared resources, so we'll be sharing that with the audience as well through our social media channels and through our link to our website. So I'm going to turn it over to Iris to close us out. But once again, to our presenters, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. I mean, I was taking so many notes. I was like frantic. Like, we need a part 2 of this. Definitely, it was so many questions I wanted to ask about, borrowing strategies from other types of natural, disasters like wildfires and all of that. So, like, you hit on everything I wanted to do for a part 2. But definitely, we were really excited about this presentation. These 3 speakers are great examples of how you can leverage your STEM background and expertise in the making and innovation arena. And I really wanted to say to those listening, especially the students, I know this time can be really discouraging and, you can easily get off track with your education and career goals, but don't. Seize this time. This time is an opportunity. So definitely take advantage, think of this as an opportunity, not, some type of like misfortune. I know, like, I talk to a lot of students and they're really frustrated about, maybe their educational career plans being delayed, but definitely take advantage of this opportunity. As our speaker said, work on your business plan, take that next step, to go after your dreams and your goals. So, like, really use this time and leverage this time. And I just really want to thank the speakers again. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will share the slides, the webinar recording, and any other pieces of information or resources that the speakers might think of, later today. We'll definitely share that by the end of the day, Monday. So all of the registrants will receive a follow-up email, and we'll also post the webinar recording on our social media accounts, so our LinkedIn and Twitter account, and also our websites for Earn and Maker. So don't forget, you will receive an email. Please, please, please complete the post-webinar survey. You'll receive that email by the end of the day, Monday, again, along with the slides and the recording. And definitely follow our HBCU Making It Innovation. Follow us on Twitter. Check out our LinkedIn page. It's a closed page, it's membership, but just send us a notice and we will admit you. We love for you to join and follow us. So thanks again and have a great day.